Poor black secretary sends grocery list to CEO by mistake. He shows up with bags in hand and a question. The 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower had never felt so empty. Tasha Williams sat at her desk, watching snowflakes dance against the floor-to-ceiling windows like tiny ghosts against the black December sky. The digital clock on her computer screen blinked 8:47 p.m., Christmas Eve. Hours ago, the executive floor had been buzzing with last-minute holiday cheer, champagne glasses clinking, designer heels clicking across marble floors, and the sound of expensive laughter echoing through the hallways. Now silence wrapped around her like a heavy blanket. She pulled her thin cardigan tighter around her shoulders. The building's heating system always seemed to forget about the secretary's desks, especially during the holidays when the maintenance crew went home early. Her fingers, stiff from the cold and 12 hours of typing, trembled as she reached for her phone. "Just finished the quarterly reports, Tasha," she whispered to herself, mimicking Mr. Reeves' voice from earlier that afternoon. "I know it's Christmas Eve, but the board needs these first thing after New Year's." She'd simply nodded, as she always did, watching him stride away in his $1,000 suit, while she calculated whether she had enough left over from her paycheck to buy her mother's heart medication and still put something decent on their Christmas table. The elevator dinged in the distance, probably the night janitor making his rounds. Tasha envied him. At least he'd be going home to his family tonight. She glanced at the framed photo on her desk. Her mother, Rosa Williams, smiling despite the oxygen tank barely visible in the corner of the shot. 68 years old and still trying to convince her daughter that everything would be fine, even though they both knew the medical bills were drowning them slowly. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Chin, their elderly neighbor. "Tasha, honey, I'm going to the store. Need anything for tomorrow?" Tasha's heart warmed. Mrs. Chin had been looking out for them since Tasha's father passed 5 years ago. The old woman was one of the few bright spots in Building C of the Riverside Housing Complex, a place where hope went to die, according to the city council, but where people like Mrs. Chin kept small flames of kindness burning. She looked at her bank account balance on her phone, $43.72. After tonight's shift, she'd get her holiday bonus, a whole $50, but that would barely cover her mother's tea and the medicine copay. Still, they needed to eat something special tomorrow. It was Christmas, after all. Her cold fingers flew across the phone screen as she typed. "Hey Mrs. Chin, thank you so much. If you could grab green beans, the canned ones are fine, cornbread mix, whatever's cheapest, sweet potatoes, just 2 or 3, and don't forget Mama's tea, the chamomile kind she likes. I'll pay you back tomorrow morning. You're an angel. Love, Tasha." She hit send and immediately felt a mixture of gratitude and shame. At 28, she should be able to afford her own groceries, especially for Christmas. But between her mother's medical expenses and her own student loans from the business degree that had landed her this secretarial job, every dollar was stretched thin. The building groaned around her, settling into its nighttime rhythm. Tasha turned back to her computer, squinting at the spreadsheet that seemed to mock her with its endless rows of numbers. Each figure represented more money than she'd see in a year, allocated for executive bonuses and corporate retreats while she sat here in a borrowed cardigan, texting neighbors for help with groceries. Her phone buzzed again. Probably Mrs. Chin confirming the list. But when she looked at the screen, her blood turned to ice. The message hadn't gone to Mrs. Chin. It had gone to Daniel Reeves, her boss, the CEO of Meridian Industries. "Oh God, oh God, oh God," she whispered, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped the phone. The contact names were right next to each other in her phone. Chin, Mrs. and CEO Daniel Reeves. In her exhaustion and the dim lighting, she'd selected the wrong one. She stared at the screen, watching the little, delivered, notification appear under her message. Her grocery list, her desperate, embarrassing grocery list, was now sitting in the phone of one of the most powerful men in New York City. The man who signed her paychecks, who lived in a penthouse apartment that probably cost more per month than she made in a year. Her first instinct was to send another message, to explain, to apologize profusely. But what could she say? Sorry, Mr. Reeves, I didn't mean to bother you with my poverty. The humiliation burned in her chest like acid. She sat frozen, staring at the phone, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Maybe he wouldn't see it. Maybe he'd just delete it and forget about it. Rich people probably got weird texts all the time from people trying to get their attention. Minutes crawled by. The snow outside grew heavier, coating the city in a pristine white blanket that made everything look clean and new. Tasha wished she could disappear into it, become just another snowflake in the storm. Her computer chimed with another email marked urgent. She mechanically opened it, trying to focus on work, trying to pretend that her biggest problem was finishing quarterly reports instead of the fact that she just exposed her desperation to the one person who held her professional life in his hands. But concentration was impossible. Every few seconds, her eyes darted back to her phone, checking for a response that never came. The silence was somehow worse than anger would have been. The elevator dinged again, closer this time. Tasha didn't look up. She couldn't handle seeing another person right now, couldn't paste on the professional smile that had become her default expression. She just wanted to finish her work, go home to her mother, and pretend this night had never happened. The elevator doors opened with a soft whoosh, and she heard footsteps, expensive leather shoes on marble, walking down the hallway. They stopped at her desk. Working late again, Tasha? She looked up to see Daniel Reeves standing there, but something was different about him. His usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled, and his tie was loosened. More importantly, he was looking at her with an expression she'd never seen before, not the distant politeness of a boss, but something that looked almost like concern. Yes, sir, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Just finishing the quarterly reports. He nodded slowly, his eyes searching her face. That's good work ethic. He paused, and she saw him glance at his phone. Tasha, I wanted to ask you something. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. He was going to fire her. Right here, right now, on Christmas Eve. Yes, sir? The address in your message. He seemed to struggle with the words. Riverside Housing Complex, Building C, Apartment 2B. That's really where you live? The question hung in the air between them like a bridge neither of them knew how to cross. Tasha nodded, unable to speak, wondering how this night had become the longest of her life. Daniel Reeves stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back toward the elevator, leaving Tasha alone with her confusion and a growing sense that something was about to change forever. 30 floors above the city, Daniel Reeves stood in his penthouse office, staring out at the snow-covered skyline through windows that cost more than most people's cars. The Christmas lights of Manhattan twinkled below like fallen stars, but tonight they felt cold and distant. His phone lay on the mahogany desk beside him, the screen still glowing with Tasha's message. Green beans, cornbread mix, sweet potatoes, don't forget Mama's tea. He'd read it dozens of times now, each word hitting him like a physical blow. Not because of what it said, but because of where it came from. Riverside Housing Complex, Building C, Apartment 2B. An address burned into his memory from a time when Daniel Reeves was just Danny, a scared 12-year-old boy who thought he was going to die in a hallway filled with smoke. His hands shook as he picked up his phone again. The expensive whiskey on his desk sat untouched, forgotten in the wake of memories that came flooding back like a dam had burst in his mind. He'd spent 25 years building walls around that part of his life, convincing himself that the frightened boy from the projects was someone else entirely. But 18 words in a text message had brought it all crashing down. Mama's tea, he whispered to himself, and suddenly he was 12 again, coughing and gasping as flames licked at the walls around him. The fire had started in the apartment below, old wiring, the landlord had said later, as if that excused the fact that half the building's smoke detectors didn't work. Danny had been alone that night, his mother working a double shift at the hospital where she cleaned floors to keep food on their table. The smoke had been so thick he couldn't see his own hands. He'd crawled along the floor, following what he thought was the wall toward the stairwell, but the building was a maze of narrow corridors and dead ends. His lungs burned, his eyes streamed, and with each breath, he felt himself getting weaker. That's when he'd started to pray, not the formal prayers from Sunday school, but the desperate, bargaining kind that came from a child who suddenly understood that death was real and close. Then, through the smoke, he'd heard a voice. Strong, calm, cutting through his panic like a lighthouse beam. "Baby, where are you? Keep talking to me. I'm coming for you." A woman's voice. Not his mother's, but warm and familiar in the way that voices from your neighborhood always were. He'd called out, his voice barely a whisper by then, and somehow she'd found him. Through the smoke and chaos, a figure had emerged, a black woman in her 40s, wearing a nightgown and slippers, a wet towel pressed to her face. "I got you, baby," she'd said, wrapping him in a coat that smelled like fabric softener and love. "Come on, we're getting out of here." She'd half carried, half dragged him through the maze of corridors, somehow knowing exactly where to go even as the smoke grew thicker. When they reached the stairwell, she'd made him go first, her hand on his back, guiding him down step by step. Outside, she'd wrapped him in her own coat and sat with him on the sidewalk, holding him as he coughed and shivered, until the paramedics arrived. "You're going to be okay," she'd whispered, stroking his hair. "You're going to grow up to be somebody special. I can feel it." The paramedics had taken him to the hospital, where his mother had found him hours later, sobbing with relief. In all the chaos that followed, the insurance claims, the temporary shelter, the move to a different neighborhood, he never learned the woman's name. His mother had tried to find her, to thank her, but the woman had moved away shortly after the fire, and there was no way to track her down. For years, Danny had carried the guilt of that unspoken gratitude. As he grew older, as he worked his way through college on scholarships and student loans, as he climbed the corporate ladder rung by rung, he told himself he would find her someday. He'd imagined the reunion, the thanks he would give, the way he would repay her kindness. But life had gotten in the way. Success had a way of pulling you forward, away from the past, until the scared 12-year-old boy felt like a character from someone else's story. He'd convinced himself that maybe it was better to leave the past buried, that digging up old memories would only complicate the life he'd built. Until tonight. Until 18 words in a text message had brought it all rushing back. Daniel walked to his wall safe and pulled out a folder he hadn't opened in years. Inside were newspaper clippings from the fire, insurance documents, and a single photograph, a group shot of the building's residents taken by a local newspaper after the fire. He'd kept it all these years, telling himself he didn't know why. He found her face in the photograph immediately. Older than he remembered, but unmistakably her. The caption read, "Rosa Williams, 43, who helped rescue several residents during the blaze, stands with her daughter Tasha, 3, outside their damaged apartment." Tasha, 3 years old in the photograph, now 28 and working as his secretary. The little girl in the picture had grown up to be the woman who stayed late on Christmas Eve to finish his reports, who said, "Yes, sir," with quiet dignity even when he knew he was asking too much. Rosa Williams. The name he'd never known, attached to the face that had haunted his dreams for 25 years. Daniel grabbed his coat and headed for the elevator. He had shopping to do, and for the first time in decades, he knew exactly what he was looking for. Not just green beans and cornbread mix, but a chance to finally say thank you to the woman who had saved his life and shaped his future with her kindness. The boy from apartment 2B was going home. The corner store on 125th Street was the kind of place that survived on hope and food stamps, where the fluorescent lights hummed with a tired persistence, and the floors had been mopped so many times the pattern had worn away. Tasha counted her crumpled bills twice before approaching the counter, her breath visible in the store's inadequate heating. "Just the eggs and rice tonight, Mr. Patel," she said to the elderly shop owner, who'd been watching her family struggle for years with the patient kindness of someone who understood what it meant to build a life from nothing. "You sure, Beta?" he asked, using the Hindi term of endearment he'd adopted for her. "The sweet potatoes are on sale. And your mother, she likes that chamomile tea." Tasha's throat tightened. Maybe next week, she whispered, knowing that next week would bring the same calculations, the same impossible choices between medication and meals. Mr. Patel nodded but slipped a small box of chamomile tea into her bag anyway. My Christmas gift, he said firmly when she started to protest. No arguments. The walk back to Riverside Housing Complex took 15 minutes through streets that transformed from merely rundown to genuinely dangerous after dark. Tasha clutched her small bag of groceries and kept her head down, her footsteps echoing off the concrete walls of buildings that had been temporary housing for 3 generations. Building C loomed ahead, its broken security door hanging open like a mouth with missing teeth. The elevator had been broken for 6 months, so Tasha climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, her keys already in her hand. The hallway smelled of cooking grease and desperation, punctuated by the sound of a baby crying somewhere behind thin walls. She paused outside apartment 2B, listening for signs of life from within. Her mother's television was on, a good sign. Rosa had been sleeping more lately, the heart medication making her drowsy, but she always tried to stay awake until Tasha got home. Mama, I'm back, Tasha called as she unlocked the door. The apartment was small but clean, decorated with second-hand furniture that Rosa had somehow arranged to feel like home. The walls were covered with family photos, certificates from Tasha's school achievements, and a small collection of plants that Rosa tended with the devotion of someone who needed to nurture something green and growing. How was work, baby? Rosa's voice came from the kitchen, where she sat at their small table, still in her nightgown and robe. At 68, she moved carefully, each step a negotiation with a body that had worked too hard for too long. Long, Tasha said, forcing brightness into her voice. But I got us some eggs and rice for tomorrow. And look, she held up the tea. Mr. Patel insisted. Rosa's face lit up with the kind of smile that had gotten them through 10 years of single motherhood after Tasha's father died. That sweet man. I'll have to make him some cookies when I'm feeling better. They both knew she wouldn't be feeling better, but neither said it. Hope was a luxury they couldn't afford to abandon. Tasha was putting the eggs in their ancient refrigerator when the knock came. Not the hesitant tap of a neighbor or the aggressive pounding of a bill collector, but something in between. Authoritative but not threatening. You expecting someone? Rosa asked, muting the television. No, Tasha said, her heart beginning to race. It was nearly 10 o'clock on Christmas Eve. Nobody knocked on doors in Building C after dark unless something was wrong. She approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. What she saw made her stumble backward as if she'd been pushed. Daniel Reeves stood in the hallway, snow melting in his dark hair, wearing a coat that probably cost more than her rent. In each hand, he carried grocery bags, expensive-looking bags from stores she'd never shopped at, bulging with contents she couldn't identify. Oh God, she whispered, her mind racing. Had he come to fire her in person? To humiliate her in front of her mother? The thought of Rosa seeing her lose her job, especially tonight, made her stomach turn. Who is it, baby? Rosa called from the kitchen. It's my boss, Tasha managed, her voice barely audible. The knock came again, gentler this time. Tasha? Daniel's voice was muffled by the door, but unmistakably his. I think I got your list. Her hand shook as she reached for the deadbolt. This was it. The moment her life fell apart completely. She opened the door slowly, as if delaying the inevitable might somehow change what was coming. Daniel stood there, snowflakes still clinging to his coat, his usually perfect appearance disheveled by the storm. But it was his eyes that stopped her cold. They weren't angry or dismissive. They were searching. As if he were looking for something he'd lost a long time ago. I think I got your list, he repeated, holding up his phone with one hand while balancing the grocery bags with the other. Green beans, cornbread mix, sweet potatoes, don't forget Mama's tea. Tasha opened her mouth to apologize, to explain, but no words came. The humiliation was complete and total, a weight that pressed down on her chest until she could barely breathe. I'm so sorry, Mr. Reeves, she finally managed. I didn't mean, it was an accident. You live here? He interrupted, his voice carrying a strange intensity. This building? This apartment? She nodded, unable to trust her voice. Daniel stepped closer, and she saw something in his expression she couldn't identify. Recognition? Confusion? Hope? Apartment 2B, he said quietly, as if the words held some special meaning. You've lived here how long? My whole life, she whispered. My mother and I, we've been here since I was 3. Something changed in his face then, a shift so profound it was like watching someone remember their own name. He looked past her into the apartment, and his eyes widened. Is that? He began, then stopped, his voice catching. Is your mother home? Before Tasha could answer, Rosa's voice came from behind her, curious and welcoming despite the late hour. Tasha, who's at the door? Invite them in before they catch pneumonia. Daniel's face went completely white. His hands trembled, and for a moment, Tasha thought he might drop the grocery bags. That voice, he whispered, so quietly she almost missed it. I know that voice. Tasha stepped aside, bewildered, as Daniel Reeves entered their small apartment like a man walking into a dream. His expensive shoes looked out of place on their worn carpet, and the grocery bags in his hands seemed to weigh nothing compared to whatever invisible burden he was carrying. Rosa Williams sat at the kitchen table, her silver hair catching the warm light from the lamp beside her. She wore a faded pink robe that Tasha had bought her 3 Christmases ago, and her reading glasses hung from a chain around her neck. When she looked up at their unexpected visitor, her expression was one of polite curiosity mixed with the natural wariness of someone who'd lived in the projects long enough to know that surprises were rarely good. Evening, she said, her voice carrying the gentle authority of a woman who had raised a daughter alone and survived everything life had thrown at her. I'm Rosa Williams. You must be Tasha's boss. Daniel stood frozen in the doorway, staring at her as if she were a ghost. The grocery bags trembled in his hands, and Tasha noticed that his breathing had become shallow, almost panicked. Mr. Reeves? She said carefully. Are you all right? He didn't answer. Instead, he walked slowly toward the living room wall, where Rosa kept her collection of family photographs. His eyes scanned the frames with desperate intensity until they landed on one particular picture, a photograph from the late 1990s showing a younger Rosa with her arm around a teenage Tasha at her high school graduation. Oh my God! He breathed, his voice barely audible. It's you. It's really you. Rosa's eyebrows drew together in confusion. I'm sorry, do we know each other? Daniel set the grocery bags down on the coffee table with trembling hands. When he looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. December 23, 1999. Building C. The fire. The words hung in the air like smoke. Rosa's face went very still, and her hand moved instinctively to her throat. The fire, she repeated slowly. You saved me. Daniel continued, his voice growing stronger. I was 12 years old. Danny Martinez back then, before I changed my name. I was trapped in the hallway, couldn't breathe, couldn't see. You came for me. You wrapped me in your coat and got me out. Rosa's hand flew to her mouth. Danny? Little Danny from 2A? Her voice rose with recognition and wonder. The boy with the big brown eyes who used to help me carry groceries? That's me, Daniel said, and now the tears were flowing freely. That's me, Mrs. Williams. Rosa. You saved my life that night. Tasha watched in stunned silence as her mother pushed herself up from the table, her movements suddenly urgent despite her frail health. She crossed the room to where Daniel stood, reaching up to cup his face in her weathered hands. Look at you, she whispered, studying his features. Look how handsome you grew up to be. I told you that night. I told you were going to be somebody special. You remembered that? Daniel's voice cracked. Baby, I remember everything about that night. You were so scared, but you were brave too. You kept talking to me even when you could barely breathe. You helped me help you. Rosa's eyes filled with tears. I worried about you for years. After we moved, I tried to find you, to make sure you were okay. But you'd moved too, and I didn't know where. Daniel laughed through his tears. I looked for you too. I've been looking for you for 25 years. I wanted to thank you, to tell you what you meant to me. What you did for me. What I did for you. Rosa shook her head. Honey, what you did for me was just as important. That night, holding you, making sure you were safe, it reminded me why I had to keep going. I was struggling so hard back then, working 3 jobs, trying to raise Tasha alone. Some nights I didn't think I could do it anymore. But seeing you, so young and vulnerable, needing someone to take care of you, it reminded me that there was still good I could do in this world. Tasha felt her own tears starting to fall as she watched her mother and her boss, 2 people from completely different worlds, find each other again across a gap of 25 years. You changed my life, Daniel said. Everything I became, everything I achieved, it started with you believing in me that night. When I was scared and alone, you told me I was going to be somebody special. Those words, they carried me through college, through every job interview, every challenge. I never forgot them. Rosa smiled, the same warm smile that had comforted a frightened 12-year-old boy in a smoke-filled hallway. And look at you now. A successful businessman, helping people, making a difference. I was right about you, wasn't I? You were right about everything, Daniel said. And now I find out that the woman who's been working for me, who stays late every night to help me succeed, is your daughter. The little girl who was only 3 years old when you saved me. He turned to Tasha, his expression filled with something that looked like awe. You've been taking care of me just like your mother did, haven't you? All these years, making sure everything runs smoothly, anticipating what I need before I even know I need it. Tasha wiped her eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. I just do my job, Mr. Reeves. Daniel, he corrected gently. Please. And it's more than just a job. You've been carrying on your mother's legacy of taking care of people. Both of you have been guardian angels in my life. Rosa laughed, a sound like music in the small apartment. Guardian angels? Baby, we're just people trying to do right by each other. But I'll tell you what, this feels like more than coincidence. This feels like the universe making sure old debts get paid. Daniel nodded, reaching into his coat pocket. Speaking of debts, I brought your groceries. All of them. And I have something I need to ask you both. He pulled out a small wrapped package. But first, this is for you, Rosa. Something I should have given you 25 years ago. With shaking hands, Rosa unwrapped the package to reveal a small silver locket. Inside was a photograph of a 12-year-old boy with big brown eyes, smiling at the camera. So you'll always remember the little boy you saved, Daniel said. And so I'll always remember the woman who gave me a second chance at life. Rosa clasped the locket to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Oh, Danny. My sweet Danny. You didn't need to do this. Yes, I did, he said firmly. I needed to do this and so much more. Which brings me to my question. He looked at both women, his expression serious now. I didn't just come here to deliver groceries and say thank you. I came here to ask if you'll let me repay the debt I owe you. All of it. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of snow tapping against the windows. Whatever Daniel was about to propose, Tasha could see in his eyes that it was going to change everything. Daniel took a deep breath, his hands clasped behind his back as he began to pace the small living room. For a moment, he looked less like a powerful CEO and more like the nervous 12-year-old boy who had once lived down the hall. Rosa, he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. 25 years ago, you didn't just save my life. You saved my future. Every success I've had, every door that opened for me, every opportunity that came my way, it all started because you believed a scared kid from the projects could become something more. Rosa shifted in her chair, uncomfortable with the praise. Danny, you did all that work yourself. You just gave me hope when I had none. Daniel interrupted gently. You showed me that there were people in this world who would risk everything for a stranger, who would choose kindness over fear. That lesson shaped everything I became. He stopped pacing and faced them both. I've spent the last 25 years building a fortune, and I never knew what it was really for. Tonight, I finally understand. It was for this moment. For the chance to pay forward what you gave me. Tasha felt her heart racing. Mr. Reeves, Daniel, what are you saying? I'm saying that I want to take care of you both, the way you took care of me. He reached into his coat and pulled out a thick envelope. Rosa, I know about your medical bills. I know about the heart medication, the specialist appointments, the treatments you can't afford. I want to pay for all of it. Everything. The best doctors, the best hospitals, whatever you need. Rosa's eyes widened. Oh, honey, that's very kind, but we can't accept. Please, Daniel said, his voice breaking slightly. Please let me do this. You gave me life twice. Once when you pulled me from that fire, and again when you showed me what it meant to be human. This isn't charity. This is a son taking care of his mother. The word mother hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Rosa's hand went to her throat, and Tasha saw tears streaming down her face. And Tasha, Daniel continued, turning to her. You've been my executive assistant for 3 years, but you've been doing the work of a chief of staff. You manage my schedule, coordinate with department heads, handle crisis communications. You're brilliant, organized, and you care about the work we do. I want to promote you to Senior Vice President of Operations, with a salary that reflects your actual contributions. Tasha's knees went weak. Senior Vice President? But I don't have an MBA. I don't have the experience. You have something better, Daniel said firmly. You have integrity, compassion, and a work ethic that puts most executives to shame. You learned those values from your mother, and they're exactly what our company needs. He walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered complex. But that's not all. This building, this place where we both grew up, it's being sold. The city wants to tear it down for luxury condos. I want to buy it instead. Both women stared at him in shock. Buy it, Rosa whispered. Buy it and transform it, Daniel said, his voice gaining strength. I want to turn Riverside Housing Complex into the Rosa Williams Community Center. Affordable housing, yes, but also job training programs, after-school care, medical clinics, educational support. A place where families like ours can build real futures. He turned back to them, his eyes bright with passion. Your mother saved one scared kid 25 years ago. I want to create a place where she can save hundreds more. Where her legacy of kindness can touch lives for generations. Rosa covered her face with her hands, overwhelmed. Danny, this is too much. It's too big, too expensive. It's exactly what you would do if you had the resources, Daniel said softly. You saved me because that's who you are. You'd save everyone if you could. Well, now you can. He knelt beside Rosa's chair, taking her hands in his. I'm not asking you to accept charity. I'm asking you to accept a partnership. Your wisdom, your heart, your understanding of what this community needs, combined with my resources and business connections. Together, we can build something beautiful. Tasha found her voice. What about the other families who live here? The people who can't afford to move? They'll be the first priority, Daniel said. No one gets displaced. Everyone gets uprated. This isn't about pushing people out, it's about lifting them up. He stood and walked to the grocery bags he'd brought. I know this is a lot to process. I know it sounds impossible. But I learned something important that night in the fire. When someone offers you their hand in the darkness, you take it. And when you finally have the strength to reach back, you do. He began unpacking the bags, revealing not just the items from Tasha's list, but a feast worthy of a Christmas celebration. Premium sweet potatoes, organic green beans, gourmet cornbread mix, and enough food to feed a dozen people. But more than that, he pulled out a small wrapped box. There's one more thing, he said, holding out the box to Rosa. I know you don't know me well enough to trust me with something this big. But I'm hoping you'll trust me with something small. Rosa opened the box with trembling hands. Inside was a set of keys. Keys to what? She asked. To apartment 2A, Daniel said quietly. The apartment where I lived as a boy. It's been empty for 6 months, but I had it renovated. 2 bedrooms, accessible bathroom, updated kitchen. It's yours if you want it. Not because you need my help, but because I need to know that the woman who saved me is comfortable and safe. He looked at both women, his expression vulnerable. I know I'm asking a lot. I know this is overwhelming. But I also know that some chances only come once. 25 years ago, you took a chance on a scared kid in a burning building. Tonight I'm asking you to take a chance on that same kid, all grown up, trying to pay forward the miracle you gave him. Rosa stood slowly, her movements careful but determined. She walked to Daniel and placed her hand on his cheek, just as she had done all those years ago. You want to know what I told you that night, when you were scared and shaking? She said softly. I told you that everything happens for a reason. That sometimes the worst moments in our lives are just God's way of positioning us for the best ones. She smiled, and in that smile, Tasha saw the same strength that had carried their family through every hardship. I think, Rosa said, that little boy I saved grew up to be exactly who he was supposed to be. And I think this old woman is ready to help him change the world. Daniel's face broke into a grin that transformed him completely. Does that mean you'll stay for dinner? Rosa laughed, the sound filling the small apartment with warmth. Honey, after all this, I think you're staying for dinner. And breakfast. And probably every meal until we figure out how to turn this crazy dream into reality. As if on cue, the apartment filled with the sound of laughter, 3 people who had found each other across time and circumstance, ready to build something beautiful together. 2 hours later, the small kitchen table that had seen so many meals of careful rationing now groaned under the weight of an impromptu Christmas feast. Daniel had insisted on cooking, claiming he'd learned his way around a kitchen during his college years when ramen noodles and determination were his primary food groups. The sweet potatoes had been transformed into a casserole that filled the apartment with the scent of cinnamon and brown sugar, while the cornbread emerged from Rosa's ancient oven golden and perfect. I can't believe you remembered how to make my grandmother's cornbread recipe. Rosa marveled, watching Daniel pull the last batch from the oven. I only showed you once, when you were maybe 8 years old. Some lessons stick, Daniel said, setting the pan on the counter to cool. Especially the ones taught with love. Tasha sat at the table, still processing the evening's revelations. She wore the same clothes she'd put on that morning for what she thought would be just another day at the office. But everything had changed. Her boss was no longer her boss, he was family. Her struggling mother was no longer facing medical bills alone, she had a son who happened to be a millionaire. And their crumbling apartment building was no longer a symbol of forgotten dreams, it was about to become a beacon of hope. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up, she admitted as Daniel placed a steaming plate in front of her. This morning I was worried about buying eggs, and now you're talking about making me a senior vice president. Daniel settled into the chair across from her, the same chair where Rosa had been sitting when he'd first heard her voice again. I know it's overwhelming. When I was 12, lying in that hospital bed after the fire, I used to have dreams like this. Dreams where the lady who saved me turned out to be connected to my future somehow. And now here we are, Rosa said, raising her glass of sweet tea in a toast. To dreams that turn out to be plans we just didn't know we were making. They clinked glasses, and for a moment, the only sound was the comfortable clink of silverware against plates, and the soft whisper of snow against the windows. Outside, Christmas Day was beginning, but inside apartment 2B, it felt like every Christmas they'd ever wanted rolled into one. Tell me about the community center, Rosa said eventually, her eyes bright with curiosity. What did you envision exactly? Daniel's face lit up with the same passion Tasha had seen during board meetings when he talked about projects he truly believed in. The bottom 2 floors would remain residential, but we'd renovate them completely. Energy-efficient appliances, proper heating, safe electrical systems. No family would pay more than 30% of their income in rent. He gestured excitedly as he spoke. The 3rd floor would house a medical clinic staffed by volunteer doctors and nurse practitioners. The 4th floor would be dedicated to education, GED programs, computer literacy classes, job training workshops. And the 5th floor. He paused, looking directly at Rosa. The 5th floor would be a child care center and after-school program, where working parents could leave their kids knowing they're safe and learning. And you want to name it after me? Rosa's voice was barely a whisper. I want to name it after the woman who showed me that one person's kindness can change the trajectory of an entire life. Daniel said firmly. The Rosa Williams Community Center isn't just a name, it's a philosophy. It's the idea that we're all responsible for taking care of each other. Tasha felt tears prick her eyes as she watched her mother's face transform. For years, Rosa had carried the weight of feeling like she hadn't accomplished enough, hadn't left a big enough mark on the world. To see her realize that her simple act of kindness had rippled outward in ways she never imagined was beautiful beyond words. There's something else, Daniel said, reaching into his coat pocket once more. Something I've been carrying for 25 years, waiting for the right moment to share it. He pulled out a small, worn piece of paper and handed it to Rosa. Her hands shook as she unfolded it, revealing a child's drawing in crayon. It showed a woman in a nightgown pulling a small boy from a burning building, with the words, "My hero," written in a child's careful handwriting. I drew that in the hospital, Daniel explained. The nurses gave me paper and crayons to help process what happened. I kept it all these years because it was the only way I had to remember you. Now I want you to have it. Rosa pressed the drawing to her chest, tears flowing freely. Oh, Danny. My sweet, brave Danny. I wasn't brave, he said softly. You were brave. You ran toward danger to save someone else's child. That's not just heroism, that's love in action. As the evening wore on, they talked about everything and nothing. Daniel shared stories from his corporate climb, carefully edited to remove the loneliness and self-doubt that had plagued him for years. Tasha told him about her college struggles and her dreams of making a difference in the world. Rosa regaled them with neighborhood gossip and stories from Tasha's childhood that made them all laugh until their sides hurt. Around midnight, as Christmas Eve officially became Christmas Day, Rosa excused herself to get ready for bed. The evening had exhausted her, but it was the good kind of exhaustion that came from joy rather than struggle. Thank you, she said to Daniel, kissing his forehead like she had when he was 12. For remembering an old woman's kindness. For growing up to be the man I always knew you could be. And for giving my daughter a chance to shine. After she disappeared into her bedroom, Daniel and Tasha sat in comfortable silence, processing the magnitude of what had happened. Are you sure about all this? Tasha asked finally. The promotion, the community center, everything? It's not just the emotion of tonight talking? Daniel smiled, and in that smile, she saw the determined boy who had survived a fire and built an empire from nothing. Tasha, I've made a lot of business decisions in my life. Some good, some bad. But this isn't a business decision. This is a family decision. And family takes care of family. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered complex that had shaped both their childhoods. Besides, I have a feeling your mother is going to keep me honest. She's not going to let me turn this into some corporate charity project. She's going to make sure we do it right. Tasha joined him at the window. Below them, the courtyard that had seen so much struggle and hardship was blanketed in pristine white, beautiful and full of possibility. You know what the best part is? She said softly. What's that? In all her stories about that fire, Mama never once mentioned that she was scared. She only ever talked about how brave you were, how proud she was when she heard you'd made something of yourself. She carried you in her heart for 25 years, Daniel. And now you're home. Outside, snow continued to fall over the riverside housing complex, covering old scars and painting new dreams in white. Inside apartment 2B, 3 people who had found each other across impossible odds sat together, planning a future none of them could have imagined when the sun rose that morning. It was Christmas Day, and for the first time in years, it truly felt like a day for miracles.